Welcome to Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and talk to industry experts about debt, money, and personal finance. I'm Doug Hoyes. As frequent listeners to this show know, I'm the co-founder of Hoyes Michaelis and Associates, a firm that does bankruptcies and consumer proposals, and I can tell you that based on my experience over the last couple of decades, that if I was to make a list of all of the reasons someone calls a bankruptcy trustee in a panic, there is one common reason that is always at the top of the list. What makes someone in debt call my office in a panic? 2 words: wage garnishment. Obviously, people go bankrupt because they have too much debt, but debt is generally something that builds up over an extended period of time. It doesn't accumulate overnight. So what's the straw that breaks the camel's back? What drives people to the breaking point and forces them to call our 310 plan helpline? Wage garnishment. If a bill collector threatens a wage garnishment, or if a wage garnishment actually starts, many people decide they have no choice but to seek the protection of a consumer proposal or bankruptcy, because a bankruptcy or consumer proposal filing immediately stops most types of wage garnishment. So, what is a wage garnishment? Is it legal? Who can get one? How do you stop it? Those are important questions, so let's spend the rest of the show talking about everything there is to know about wage garnishments. To help me do that, I'm joined today by Rebecca Martin. Rebecca, thanks for being here. Welcome to the show. Can you give us a quick introduction about you?
Yes, as you said, my name is Rebecca Martin. I am a trustee here with the Windsor and Leamington offices of Hoyes Michaelis and Associates. I got my training at a big accounting firm and then joined Hoyes Michaelis back in 2003 once I received my license.
There you go. So let's talk about the legalities of this first. So let's kind of go through this quickly and hit all the key points to begin with. So we're talking about wage garnishment. So tell me right off the bat, what is a wage?
A wage is something you get paid for working.
Okay, and what is a garnishment?
A garnishment is the actual legal procedure the creditor goes through to collect on the debts owing by trying to take property that is in someone else's hand other than the debtor.
Okay, so what then is a wage garnishment?
So the actual wage garnishment is the legal procedure where the creditor collects the debt owing to you by your employer.
Okay, so that's where they're taking the money off my paycheck then. So you call it a legal procedure. So I assume, therefore, it is governed by some law?
Yes, there is a legislation for it. It's called the Ontario Wages Act.
And therefore, what we're talking about today applies specifically in Ontario. It's provincial legislation. So if you happen to be listening to this show somewhere other than Ontario, the rules are probably very similar, but maybe not exact. So that's our little caution for the day. This is Ontario law that we're talking about here today. So what, based on the law, would not be included as part of wages?
Well, whenever you get paid, you automatically have certain deductions like EI, CPP, income tax. Those aren't included as wages. Okay, so the wages are what I actually get. So how much then, under the law, the Wages Act of Ontario, how much can be garnished? What's the maximum that a creditor can get if they go through this legal procedure? So 20% can be garnished unless it's for family support, in which case it goes to 50%. But you have to keep in mind that the court can either increase or decrease that amount. Okay, so a typical creditor, that would be someone like the credit card I didn't pay, my bank loan, anything like that. The most they could get is 20% of my wages unless the court says something different. Is that a pretty quick summary? Okay. And so who can get a wage garnishment? Well, anyone. If you're owing money, the creditor can take it to court. And if they win, the court can give them the order to garnish your wages. And so if I'm a creditor, let's flip it around here then. Somebody owes me money. Let's say I'm a bank or a credit card company. What do I have to do then? What's the process? I have to go to court. How does that work? What's involved there? So essentially, the first thing you do is you issue what's called a statement of claim. That gives the debtor so much time to actually respond to it. If there's no response, then it goes to court, and the creditor automatically wins, and the court issues a judgment, and that judgment then allows them to garnish you the wages. And so that judgment then I have to turn it into the garnishment order itself, and so I have to go back to court to get that, or there's some further legal process, I guess, to get that. So, and how long does that take? Like if someone owes me money, can I get a garnishment today? No, you can't get a garnishment today. If you've ever seen a statement of claim form, it says that you're given a certain amount of time to respond as the debtor. And I believe that's 21 days from when it's deemed to have been mailed. They will get a judgment unless there's some sort of statement of defense filed.
Gotcha. And in my experience, I'm sure your experience is the same, it usually takes longer than that. A big bank isn't going to cut it right to the day. They're probably going to send you out the notice, give you ample time to respond. They might give you 30 days, 40 days, 50 days, 60 days, whatever. And then that's when the court date actually happens. And so what you said, if I don't show up in court, I automatically lose.
That's right.
Okay. Whereas if I do show up in court, I've got a chance to fight it, but my chances are pretty slim, I would assume, because, hey, I owe the money. Unless I can prove I don't owe the money, I'm going to lose is what's going to happen then. So are there any, we've talked about the usual guys, banks, credit card companies, things like that. Are there any special rules for anyone else other than those guys I just mentioned?
Yep, that's true. Canada Revenue Agency, they don't need a court order. They can just notify your employer that you're owing tax money and they can garnish your wages.
And so what's the piece of paper that they would send to your employer to do that?
The document is called a requirement to pay.
So it's a Revenue Canada or Canada Revenue Agency requirement to pay notice. They don't need to go to court to do that. They fill it out. They send it to your employer. Boom. A wage garnishment can start. So, okay. So Revenue Canada, Canada Revenue Agency doesn't need to go to court. Who else has special rules when it comes to wage garnishments?
Credit unions do. They don't need to court order as well. A lot of times when you get your loan from the credit union, they have you sign a piece of paper called a wage assignment. And if you're not making those payments on that loan, they just send that wage assignment to your employer, and that gives them the authority to garnish your wages as well.
And that's something that perhaps people don't fully understand, because they always think of a credit union as being, well, they're, in my neighborhood, they're not a big bank, they're very friendly. Well, yeah, they are, but they also have this special power under the Ontario Wages Act that allows them to get a garnishment without having to go through the normal court process. Does that apply to anyone else? Anybody else on this list of special people that we're talking about?
Well, I suppose if you're getting any kind of debt and you sign a assignment with the creditor, they can then technically send that to your employer and ask that your wages be garnished.
So any voluntary wage assignment. And we see this quite common, at least it has been in the past, with things like payday loan companies. So they give you the payday loan, but they get you to sign a piece of paper saying, if you don't pay me, then we can immediately go to court. And in fact, we don't need to go to court. We can just send this piece of paper right to your employer and start garnishing your wages. So, okay, so that's the big picture on wage garnishments. Have you got any examples of people that you've run into, people you've helped who had a wage garnishment? And, if so, what did you do? What was the solution?
Well, you're right. It's just like you said at the beginning of the program, that just the wage garnishment is what causes people to call us in the first place. And so I thought I'd share a couple of stories of people that I helped last week. So the first guy, and I'll call him Frank, and Frank's not his real name. It's just a name I made up. A few years ago, he was self-employed, and as a lot of times happens, he ran into trouble and then started using his tax money, or the money he should have been paying for income tax, to help fund his business. And before he knew it, he owed Revenue Canada $25,000. He eventually had to retire, but he still owes Revenue Canada this $25,000. He can't pay it. He can't work out a payment plan. So the only source of income he has now is CPP. So Canada Revenue Agency starts garnishing his CPP. So he came to see me, and he decided to file bankruptcy. So he files for bankruptcy. We send notice to Service Canada. They're the ones who issue the Canada Pension Plan. And we sent notice to Canada Revenue Agency. And then the next month, he gets his full pension check again.
And that stopped it right away then, is what you're saying?
And that stops it right away. There's a little bit of a lag, but depending on when you're filing. I mean, you can't come in on, let's say, the last day of the month and expect the pension check tomorrow to have the garnishment removed from it. But the one the next month will have the garnishment removed. And
that's because obviously the check is being cut a few days in advance by the government, or the electronic deposit has been paid. So, okay, so that was an example of somebody who had a government debt. Have there been other types of debts that you've been able to help with when it came to wage garnishments?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the other person I saw, I'm going to call her Joan. She went through a marriage separation and lost her car. So the car company sold it and went after her for the balance owing. And so they took her to court and got the garnishment order and sent it to her employer. And she said she didn't even know about it. All of a sudden, she gets a note from her HR department saying, "We have this notice. We're going to garnish your wages." She came to see me. She filed a consumer proposal. So we notified the court. We notified the creditor. We notified her employer. You're under consumer proposal protection. So now the wage garnishment stops.
So the message here is that for those types of debts that you just talked about, a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal very quickly stops wage garnishments, and that for a lot of people is the whole reason that they do them. Great. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thanks for joining me. We're going to take a quick break and then come back and talk a bit more about wage garnishments here on Debt Free in 30.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
We're back here on Debt Free in 30, and today we are talking about wage garnishments. It's one of the most common reasons that someone starts thinking about having to go bankrupt or file a consumer proposal. In the first segment, Rebecca Martin walked us through some of the technical aspects. What is it? How does it work? And now we're going to look at some practical things. I'm joined again by Ted Michaelis. Ted, how are you doing?
Fine, Doug. How are things?
It's all good. So wage garnishments, would you agree that this is, in fact, one of the main reasons that someone is contacting you? That's kind of the impetus, the straw that broke the camel's back kind of a thing to talk to us?
That's a perfect analogy. It is the straw that breaks the camel's back. You're already afraid about your debt loads and the people that you owe. You get notices from the court or collection agencies. Maybe you've been ignoring them. Finally, somebody has taken you to court. They're garnishing your wages. Now, what do you do about it? And
it's really the symptom of the underlying problem. I've had this underlying problem for a long time. It takes a while to go to court and garnish someone's wages, but now it crops up. So, okay, you asked the question, give us the answer. What do you do about it? When you are threatened with a wage garnishment, and let's start with that. Let's say there's not even any actual court actions yet, but the collector says, well, if you don't pay me, I'm going to garnish your wages. What's your thought process at that point in time?
So the first thing that people have to recognize is a threat is different than the actual wage garnishment. So it's pretty easy for anybody to say, I'm going to garnish your wages. Take that as a warning sign or a signal that it's time for you to do something about this debt. So they may or may not do it. Don't leave yourself open to what they want to do. You need to take progressive steps to deal with the debt problem now. Now, that may mean contacting somebody like Doug or myself, somebody from our firm. It may mean simply moving money around. It depends on your own unique financial situation. The important thing to emphasize is somebody's made the threat. You need to deal with it before they actually make it a reality. You do not want a wage garnishee. You start missing mortgage payments. I'm sorry.
So what you're talking about then is you got to be in control.
Yeah, you got to be proactive. That's
you got to be proactive. Okay, so let's talk about some proactive things you can do. So you mentioned moving money around. What are you talking about there?
Okay, so the person that only has one problem account, I don't know, let's say you've defaulted on your Rogers account because you got mad at them because they're crooks. You stopped paying that bill. They're now threatening you with a wage garnishee. They're going to take legal action against you. All right, well, pay off the account. That's the simplest solution to make that problem go away. The difficulty is most of the folks we talk to don't just have one account that's in trouble. They have a series of accounts in trouble, or they've got accumulated debt that they don't have access to money to move around. I suppose you could take a cash advance on a credit card to pay off the Rogers bill, but now you got a problem with the credit card.
Yeah, and that's certainly not something we'd want to recommend. So if you have one account that's relatively small and you can deal with it, then your advice is pay it. Then you're done. Problem solved. That's it. But if you have, if it's an old cell phone bill, okay, it's $500, fine, I will come up with the $500 and pay them off. If it's a $20,000 line of credit that I wasn't able to pay, and now I'm a few months behind, they're threatening to take me to court, they're threatening to garnish my wages, I can't just ignore it. I can't just move money around because it's too big a number.
Right.
So, you're saying I shouldn't be ignoring it. Because with an amount like that, they're probably going to do something.
Okay, so the way you phrase that question pretty much produces the answer. You've got more of a problem than you can deal with yourself, so you've got to look to outside sources. So the first place I always recommend is family and friends. So are there people that you rely on that you trust that will give you good financial advice? Now be careful here. You're talking about your money, and so I know you're uncomfortable talking to anybody about it, but getting advice from Aunt Betty may not be the best source of advice to deal with this problem because there's a threat for legal action.
Well, and Aunt Betty may not be a financial expert. So when my car's making a funny noise, I probably don't talk to Aunt Betty because she's probably not a mechanic. Now, I do have a brother-in-law who is a mechanic. He'd be a perfect person to talk to. So family and friends is a great place to start, but you got to kind of take the advice with a grain of salt. And I guess what you're really saying is, look, if Aunt Betty is rich and can loan you the money to pay off the debt, fine. Then she's an excellent person to talk to.
Or Aunt Betty may have been through this herself before, and so she may have a solution or a path that you can follow. And what you're looking for is tools to help you through the problem. So you start with family and friends because these are people that you trust. The next layer out is some sort of professional. Do you talk to your banker? Well, maybe if you don't have a lot of debt, if it's only one or two things, and there's a chance that you can consolidate or group things together. Might be more effective to talk to your accountant or lawyer if you have access to those things. And frankly, I think the average person, their best bet is to go on the internet and find somebody, well, like us. A credit counselor perhaps, a trustee in bankruptcy, somebody that's a trained professional in dealing with debts.
Well, so let's talk about the bank, though, because that would be an obvious thing. You know, I owe a bunch of money to this guy. If I can borrow some from that guy, pay it off, then I'm good. What do I need to worry about, though, when I'm talking to the bank?
Well, so the first concern for the bank is they want to lend you money when you don't need to borrow it. If you're already in trouble, the bank's going to say, well, you know, we've already loaned you some money in the past. If I loan you more to pay off the other guy, now I've got all of your eggs in my basket. If something goes wrong, I'm going to take a hit. And more importantly, they may charge you extra money because they're now saying, well, you know, you want us to help you out when you're in trouble. That's a little more problematic than when you go to them when you don't have any problems at all. So the bank is a logical place to look, but I wouldn't put a lot of faith in that unless you don't have a lot of debt. Your situation isn't complicated.
And this is a numbers game.
Right.
So
It's all a numbers game.
If the bank or the finance company is going to charge me a pretty high interest rate because, like you say, I'm already in a bit of financial trouble, then am I just making my problems worse by trying to replace one debt with another? Obviously, I don't want to be doing that.
What you are is you're trying to buy some time. And remember, what we're talking about here is how do we avoid a wage garnishee? So buying time is good. It doesn't solve the problem. And what you really want to do is dig down and solve the problem. So I don't know, if you have a sore tooth, you go to a dentist. If your hair's looking bad, you go to your stylist. If you have problems with your finances with debt, you should talk to an expert that deals with finances and debt.
Yeah, and my hair looks great. You can't see it on radio, but I just want to make that point. Well, and so you're right. You got to look at the bigger picture here and treat the underlying problem. I've got too much debt. That's why I haven't been able to pay them back. Now, buying time might be a perfectly good answer in some cases.
Correct.
If I've got a $1,000 cell phone bill, but I know my tax refund's coming in a month and it's going to be $1,500, okay, buying time makes perfect sense. Yep. If I know that at summer shutdown we get all our vacation pay paid out and I get a summer bonus, great. Maybe that's enough to clean it up, so buying time makes sense. Yep. But let's take the scenario then where, no, buying time isn't going to solve the problem. Yeah, okay, I'm getting a $1,000 tax refund, but I'm being potentially sued for $20,000. That's not going to work. Buying time isn't the answer. So what are the next steps then? What are the next things I should be thinking about?
Well, so when you do speak to a professional, they're going to talk to you about credit counseling as a solution, consumer proposals, maybe even personal bankruptcy. And all of those things may be intimidating because you're not familiar with them. You don't know what they mean. So do a Google search on all three terms to get a better idea about it. But frankly, what we're talking about is a structure or solution that somebody can provide you with to get you out of this trouble. Now, right now we're just talking about the threat of a wage garnishee. So the problem here is you're afraid. If you want a real problem, don't do anything and they start garnishing your wages. Now you got a real problem. The wage garnishee is a bigger problem than just owing the debt because now there's no money for the rent, groceries, can't put gas in the car. Things are going to start, it's a domino effect. You're going to have a problem across the board, not just where you were.
And if you've got a legal garnishment coming against you where it's already started, then at that point you've got a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy or pay it. Those are your only choices, and that's what you've got to do. Okay, well I think that's a good summary. So in summary, what you're saying is you've got to be in control, you've got to be proactive. Sitting there waiting for the problem to go away isn't going to help. The threat of a garnishment is nowhere near as serious as an actual garnishment. They're going to threaten you all the time, but you can't leave it forever because if they do take you to court, then you got a garnishment, and that really mucks up your personal finances. I appreciate that. Thanks for coming in, Ted.
Have a nice day.
Thanks very much. We'll be back to wrap it up right here on Debt Free in 30.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back. It's time for the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. My first guest today was Rebecca Martin, who explained that a wage garnishment is a legal procedure where someone you owe money to collects a debt by taking a portion of your paycheck. In our second segment, Ted Michaelis gave a practical approach for dealing with a wage garnishment. That's the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. So, what are my thoughts on wage garnishment? Well, as I said twice during the show, a wage garnishment is often the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back when it comes to debts. We often assume that our debt problems are not serious until a wage garnishment starts. When we start losing a chunk of our paycheck, we know we have a problem. I agree with what Rebecca and Ted said on the show. A wage garnishment will not just disappear on its own. You have limited options for dealing with a wage garnishment. You can quit your job, but that's not a great long-term solution. You can let the garnishment continue, but that can be very costly. Think about what it would be like to have an immediate 20% cut in your pay, and you can see why just letting the garnishment continue may put you in a very difficult financial position. If your wages are being garnished for one debt, it's quite likely that you have other debts as well, and that's why often the solution is to file a consumer proposal or bankruptcy. That's not a decision to be taken lightly, but as Ted said earlier, sometimes it's better to put your debts behind you and get a fresh start. That's our show for today. We've got more information on how to stop a wage garnishment on our website at hoyes.com. We also have full show notes on our website and links if you want to download an audio copy of this show. That's hoyes.com, HOYES.com. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.